I wonder how trusting of a person you are. Yeah, if you are walking down the street and somebody opens up a coat and says, I got a bunch of Rolexes, would you like to buy one? Maybe not that kind of trust. But really, how trusting or open are you to others or to new things? Some of us are shyer or more reticent, more closely guarded. But I would offer that most of us trust people or others are more trusting than we might even realize. Whether you get an Uber ride and you hope that that person doesn't have a horrible criminal record, or you're going into the cafeteria or out to eat somewhere and you hope that the chef or the cook didn't drop the skirt steak that you're about to eat, put it back on your plate. When you're going in the doctor's office, you trust that they're not really still practicing, but they really know something about the medicine that is on the door sign out front. That they actually went through all their anatomy classes, and you're not the first one. They can recognize the difference between a pancreas and a lung, that kind of thing. So we trust strangers sometimes, people we barely know. Day-to-day experiences. Whether it's a driver or a pilot But when it comes to trusting God, that's a little tougher, I think, for some of us. And at the same time, as we talked about in Church Without Borders, as Pastor Michelle said beautifully, sometimes that's really difficult, but then sometimes it's just every day a part of our faith. It is what we're asked to do, to step into the unknown with God. So really, it's not that unusual for any of us to be asked to trust in God. Well, when I was a youth leader at 20 in my home church, we had taken the youth group out to Colorado to an adventure camp, a Christian camp, where we do whitewater and some backpacking in the Rockies. And then on the one day before we went out onto the trail, we were going to go rappelling, which is where you have some line and you go backwards off the side of a mountain. Now, here's a little secret. Some people are afraid of snakes, some people are afraid of spiders. But as a young person, my most terrifying imaginable scenario would be anything to do with anything over 10 feet tall. So here I am with a group of 8th, 7th, and 8th graders. And the cliff is, you do that. And this thing's about, 80, 100 feet. It's too high. And all the kids are down. And they're saying, hey, come on, it's great. Come on. And I'm shaking like a tree. And so I'm all harnessed up, and I have the rope, and I'm belaying, and they give me the commands. And so the lady who's helping me says, all right, you ready? I said, no, I'm not ready. Just look at me. Don't look down. Just look at me. Listen to my voice. And just trust. It's just like in your faith. You're going to take that first step off. You're not going to feel anything at first. And then, keep your feet parallel to the rock and just walk down. And I'll give you a line. Okay, so, all right. So here I am. And she's like, okay, now just step back. And as soon as I start to step back, I hear the guy who's next to her say, wait! And, okay, my heart is racing like a jackrabbit. And he turns to her quickly. You weren't going to let him go off like that, were you? It's like, yeah, I checked all the buckles and the harness. It's all good. And it was, except for the main line that connected me to her and the belay. So if I would have stepped off that thing, nothing. So he fastens me in. He says, okay, are you ready? I said, no! Are you kidding me? Yeah, yeah, I'm ready. Oh, okay. So now I'm really stretched to trust these folks. And he said, let's just pray for a moment. Okay. And we did. And he said, you're not going to see me when you go off the overhang. but listen for my voice. I'm here. Just like in your faith, you listen for God. Might not be able to see, but he's got you. Okay. And I did. And I went, and the kids cheered me, and I think my shorts were a little soiled, but I made it. Way out of my comfort zone. As Kathy read out of Genesis, it's out of the lectionary, it's 4 verses. God meets this Mesopotamian guy named Abram in the land of Haran, and he says to him, go from your country, from your people, from your father's household, your family, to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. And then in the most understated part of the Bible I think I've read anywhere in Scripture, 3 words, so Abram went. Now, I don't know about you. Some of you may be more organized than others, more tightly scripted or a-personas. How many of you would be okay if I said, okay, as a church, we're going to take a trip. I'll tell you what it costs after we get loaded up, and I'll tell you where we're going sometime after we're in the air. Yeah, okay, yeah. Sign me up. Abram doesn't know where this land is. Doesn't show him on the map. He's got to convince Sarai about all this too. Not sure she's all excited and want to leave her family. This is a joint deal here. And together with their servants, they're going to go into this unknown. I don't know, maybe Abram was bored of life with his father. Maybe he was overbearing. Maybe he was the kind of guy who was always looking for adventure. He doesn't seem like he's highly organized, at least in this text. And I want you to think about this. Here's an older couple, an infertile couple, a nomadic couple going from place to place. No children, no land, and God's telling them in the aged part of their life that they're going to have a land and a family and then all kinds of descendants. God's making some big promises here. Yeah? And nothing in their lives up to this point has led to any evidence that any of that's going to be true of what their lives are going to be. So they have to take this first step into something that is very unknown, very different from anything that has been their normal. Fast forward a couple hundred years in the Bible. Remember the story of Moses. He's leading the people out of slavery with God's help, God's command, and then Moses dies. Joshua takes over, and they're going into the land of promise. And as they're about to enter in the promised land, in one of the lesser known texts of the Bible, the priests are carrying the Ark of the Covenant with the 10 Commandments and a couple of other objects in there. And as they're about to cross into their first day in the promised land, they meet the river Jordan as this geographical boundary. Apparently at this point in the river Jordan, it's wider than the people are able to traverse well, and they don't know how are they going to cross. So God says to them, in the second instance of water parting, tell the priest to take the first step into the water with the ark. I wonder if this is where we get the expression, you got to get your feet wet. Tell them to step into the water, and once they do, I will part the river, and the people will go through. But I'm not going to do anything until you guys take the first step. So this partnership of God's people and God speaking and saying, go, and the people choosing or having the choice to respond and say, yes, or no, staying where I'm at. At least I know where I'm at. Take us back to Egypt. At least we had 3 squares of the meal there each day. At least that was known. This promise stuff is a little too uncertain. No, as a faith community and individuals, I would say we also are always challenged with this moment of promise and stepping into the unknown, of trusting God to grow to where God would have us to be, and a reluctance or a let's stay firmly where we're at because this is what we know. If you think about it, it's what we experience every week in worship. So on the one hand, we come to church for the comfort, for the known, for the community, for the liturgy, for the hymns, the music, all those things, fellowship hall and maybe some coffee hour. All those things that are known, that are routine, that are habit. We talk to the people we know, and yet in the same breath, Jesus is always telling his disciples then and now, I need you to go to these neighbors who you don't know, these neighbors who are strangers. They're part of my body too. I need you to be beyond these walls in your community, living out this faith that you grow and nurture in here. There's always that tug of war between comfort and security in the known that nurtures us, that we need, and this unknown pull that Jesus calls us out beyond the things that we're used to people unknown, to challenge things that are status quo in our life, that stretch us, that quite honestly make us uncomfortable because they're new to us. They're changes. They cause us to let go a little bit of our tightly held securities and to go into a place where God might be calling us. Maybe for you that's singing in the choir because the only place you've sung in the last 20 years is in the shower. And you're afraid of what other people might think of your voice. Maybe you're a little bit introverted. Maybe it's to go volunteer with the juvenile detention kids in Warrenville and you say, I've never been in a prison. And I don't know how these kids will receive me. And what do I know about kids who've been in prison? But maybe that's where you feel like God is calling. Or going out for the first time to serve a meal at Community Kitchen, or to volunteer with the families at PADS. You say, I've never done this before. Or to lead a discussion topic about a Bible passage. And you say, well, gosh, I don't know the Bible very well. Well, but maybe you're feeling led to that new place of growth, especially during the season of Lent. This place where, just like Abram and Sarah, felt like, I've not been there before. This is way different from anything I've experienced in the past. And I'm not sure I can do it. Yeah, by yourself you can't. But you don't go alone. You always go with God. And you'd be amazed what you can do with God that you never thought you could do. And the things that seemed impossible, that God says, hey, let me have at you and walk with me and let's dance and see what happens. Now here's the rub. God comes to Abram and Sarah when he's 75 years old. Now, as I mentioned in the Bible study this week, Genesis timelines and dates, how do I say this? They seem kind of questionable. Noah's getting to be 600 some years old. Enoch's, these guys are closing in on 1,000. Did they not have the same kind of math? I don't know. Anyway, the point is that Abram's older in life, and this is broad brush, but I think the older we get, sometimes the more, not always, but sometimes we get a little more settled in our ways. Is that fair? Maybe not. So sometimes it might get even a little harder to change habits or routines. the older we get. God says, I'm going to make you the father of many peoples. I'm going to bless all these nations. And it takes 15 years till Abram and Sarah, we encounter them with God in chapter 15 of Genesis. And Abraham at this time says, listen, you've blessed me with all these animals. With my tribe has grown, but I still don't have any kids. You said I was going to be the father of many people. I don't have any children. And it's been 15 years, God, since you told me I was going to have children. This is a big deal, and there's between that little dialogue with God and Abram, and anybody who's struggled even today with infertility knows what a painful, tearful, tough journey that is. 15 years. Him and Sarah going back and forth. It's not just Abraham wondering, as this promise is stretched further and further year after year. And here's why I say the rubber hits the road, because is it not sometimes really hard to hold on to trust with God when things in the world seem to not be materializing as the promises of God have said? For example, the vision of the prophet Isaiah. The lion will lie down with the calf, the leopard will lie down with the goat. Things that were once enemies are going to be copacetic and get along and lie down on the grass together in peace, predator and prey. That's not the world I'm experiencing as Russia's invading Ukraine, as the sabers of war are jangling all through Europe and here. That's a beautiful vision. The Prince of Peace who calls us into a peaceable kingdom. But have we realized that yet? No, that's very much like that timeline of Sarah and Abraham, waiting, believing, hoping, but not yet, having a part to play. I seek to be a peacemaker in this world, in the corner of this world that I am in everything that I can do. But sometimes that doesn't feel like a lot in the face of large world events. And so it takes a lot in that moment for Sarah and Abram to trust. And as Abram is ranting to God, he's like, you told me this is how it was going to be. You promised. Where are you at? And instead of God saying, you're fired, or God saying, forget it, I'm going to get somebody else, or how dare you challenge me? I'm God. God says to Abram, come outside and look at the stars. Count them up. He says, I can't. Your family will be more numerous than the stars in the sky. And Abram says, really? Still? Another 10 years pass. Quarter of a century. In this very famous story about the oaks of Mamre, the second passage that Kathy read, the three figures, the three divine figures, the messengers, whether it's the Trinity, God, Son, and Spirit, or if it's three angels of God, they come down and they say, this time next year, Sarah will have a son. And Sarah overhears and, yeah, come on. Aren't we done with this narrative? I mean, give her a break. It's been 25 years. And the figure says, you laughed. No, I didn't. I always get a little bit of a kick out of that. This back and forth. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yeah, you did. But can't we cut her a break for being a little cynical? A little bit of laughter? I'm old. We've missed our window. And maybe that's the whole point of the story that I really latch on to is, at this point, we can't do anything. It's too late. We've given up hope. This is not biologically, physically possible. And maybe along this journey, as we talked about in Bible study, along the way, both Sarah and Abraham I trust you, God, but I want control. I trust you, but I'm going to do the driving. I trust you, but this is how we're going to do things. And maybe it takes them to the point where they absolutely have nothing else they can control, where God says, okay, now are you ready? We're done playing games here. Are you really willing to trust me? Because I'm going to do this. And here's where I think it's really a powerful story of faith, because there's a lot of times when as people and as individuals we say, I don't think that's possible. And we talk about all the ways that it can't happen. And God keeps pulling. And God keeps speaking. And I read back in this church's history in the minutes where they say, in the early 1900s, our pastor left after 3 months that we weren't able to pay him. And he said we promised him we're going to pay him, but he left because we weren't able to come up with money, and we're afraid the church is going to fold. And then I read further in the minutes, about a decade later, we don't have enough people to cut the lawn out behind us anymore, so maybe we ought to give that to the park district. And then I hear the church saying, we should consider being an open and affirming church. That's going to cause too much dissension in the church. People might leave. The church waits a couple years. We're still not. And then finally, the church says, we can do this because God's calling us to do it. And then I read about potential move out to 63rd Street or potential acquiring of the dentistry building next door. And then this building becomes open next door. We're not sure. And good debate within the congregation. Should we do this or not? Can we do this? And the community kitchen is born several years after the church decides to do something about it. There's always some hesitancy to leave the known and the secure and the protect what we know as the institution, the First Congregational United Church of Christ. But then there's always this God tug to step into something new wherever God is calling us to be in ministry right now in the world and in our community. And let me give you one last example. After 2 years of pandemic, and I just was thinking about this as Pastor Michelle was saying the opening prayer, and I thought how beautiful it is to see all of you here. And I remember just in an instant what it was like to stand here with the church empty and speak to all of you there. And we find a way to step into the unknown and be church and be God's people. And so I would say we could come back and get to everything we used to do and get back to everything we know. Or we could take this moment to say, yeah, a lot of those old things are things we need, but there may be some ways that faith, life, and the world have changed that God is calling us to be now in ways we haven't been before. How do we take that first step into the unknown, and as we cross over that ledge, saying, you may not see me, but I'm here, and I've got you. Do you trust me? 12 disciples were in the boat as it was about to capsize, but only one of them ever had the nerve to step out of it and say, I want to walk on water with you. The other 11 were able to say, hey, Pete got all wet. But they never knew what it was to walk on water. Sometimes as a church and as individuals this Lent, we got to take a step out of the boat. What is that for you? And what is it for us? Amen.